Hey, this is Tiger. Welcome to my stream. Hi AJ, thank you for moderating my stream, and today without any noise from the game intro. So we have to produce our noise ourselves. What I wanted to do today was to take a break from the Swiss train lore and go back to the United Kingdom and investigate a bit how you find the correct speeds for freight trains. Yes, I've started saying freight trains since I have been corrected on not pronouncing this word properly. Hello CD Radar. Very nice to have you here, even though we are not talking about ETCS today. That will be next week and the week after most probably. But I thought we have driven this Luzern-Suchsee quite a lot in the past 2 weeks, so we switch in something else and let's have a look at the Class 66 on the Brighton Main Line and try to find some hold on how you get the correct maximum speeds for freight trains in the United Kingdom. It's never too late to start saying freight and playing freight, because on the Brighton Main Line, the London Commuter DLC, have been added a couple of new freight services that are really fun to play. I'm really happy that they added them to the DLC, and of course, like always, there are some issues, but nevertheless they gave me a lot of joy. You can see that I already played them all, and I have found one that I want to share with you today. That is the New Haven Day aggregates to Acton Terminal Complex 1243. We take this train at Wivelsfield and drive them up north to Clapham Junction, and then the train will have to go out through a portal to get to the terminal complex in Acton. We just jump into it. We play in January. Maybe it will start snowing at some point, and then we will see what happens. A very nice picture this here from the Spirit of Steam DLC. Some snow would be nice. I'm quite sure that we will be getting some snow at some point during this run. So we are starting at 12:49, so we will have broad daylight in Wivelsfield. Wivelsfield is a station between Brighton and the point where the fast lane and the slow line converge, or yeah, if you're coming from the south and driving into London, they converge. No, the other way around. If you drive to Brighton to the south, then they converge, and if you're driving to the north to London, then they will split up into the line, into the fast lane and the slow line. And we are south of that point. We will be getting there with our train, and then we will go almost all the way to London Victoria, but in Clapham Junction we will put this train on a siding, and then the AI will drive it out of the map. This is our beautiful Class 66. Very nice locomotive. Not the newest one on the market, but one of the very few modern standalone locomotives that we have in Great Britain. In Train Sim World, it has the EWS, the English, Welsh and Scottish Railway livery. What makes sense, because the EWS was the train operating company or freight operating company that brought those locomotives to Great Britain. You can see we actually have two of them to pull our heavy train. We have aggregate carrying boxcars, JNAs loaded, and quite a few of them. You can see that, and they are loaded to the brim. so we need some traction power to move that train. EWS Railways does not exist anymore. It has been bought up by DB Schenker, more or less the Deutsche Bahn, with all their Class 66s. This is why we have in the game a livery with DB Schenker. DB Schenker now runs, I think, under the name of DB Cargo UK, so all the liveries that we have in the game are no longer contemporary liveries, or at least the companies have been renamed so far. You see, I will take it easy with driving this service and celebrating this locomotive a bit. I think there is a lot of nice stuff that they implemented for this locomotive. We're sitting in the driver's seat, we can look around in the cab a bit. And what would you do if you just spawn in a locomotive like this, or if you just waited here on the platform and then your colleague stopped here and say, here, this is your train, drive it to Clapham Junction, please? Well, perhaps you would look around and see, where are my safety devices like AWS and DSD should be on? I have two indicators telling me that the DSD and the AWS are isolated. Maybe we should turn them on. That's the first thing. You can actually start looking for switches. They exist, but they are not that easy to find if you don't know where to look. You have two fuse boxes here. Sometimes that's funny actually. If you stand on a place like this, you don't hear the engine sound anymore. But if you go down, you hear the engine sound again. So you have a left fuse box and a right fuse box, and here is all the stuff that is interesting. All those fuses more or less work, and you should not really touch them because they will more or less kill your train all the time. The two things that are interesting for us in setting up the train is the DSD isolate, what is isolated on default. We switch it to normal so that it works, and the AWS TPWS switch here. That is captioned AWS TPWS isolation fuse now on some older versions of this locomotive. It would be called something cryptical like 24 volts fuse or something like that. You need to turn that on for the AWS system to work. Then the two indicator lights turn off. The nice thing about the freight services here on the busy BML is that you have a cab where you can actually see the scenery, not like in the Electrostar where you just have this little window and you have to peep out only to the very front of your train. Here you can see a lot of the nice scenery, and you can see all the other trains passing by, overtaking and so on. So what would we need to do to start this train? We would have to insert our reverser handle. If we switched on the AWS before, then the self-test runs. We can see that all the indicators on the AWS panel are lit. We have to cancel the AWS alarm, then the indicators go off. Our lights, the panel for the lights is more or less here. I might want to try it like this so that you can see what the switches do. We have a panel here that indicates us which of the lights are actually lit on the outside of the locomotive, because we obviously cannot see that from inside. The most easy cab lights works. Desk light is a bit a funny one, because you would expect maybe something like this here lighting up, but actually the desk light switch here switches those buttons here, pass and goods, the two indicators for the brake settings. They are illuminated. You can see the goods indicator is illuminated, and if you turn the desk lights off, then this button switches off. So if that is intentional, I'm not super sure, but at least this is how it works. Instrument lights, you can hear. Tail lights is for the tail lights on the other end. Our locomotive has two driving cabs on either end, one and with the tail lights you switch on the red marker lights on the other end. At least in the game, from what you hear and can read, in real life this would turn on the tail lights here on this cap. What makes it actually easier to switch caps if you can just turn on the tail lights from the cap that you were leaving. That switch works, but it works on the other end. And this here is for the light setup, typically off, day running, yard work, and night running. And you can see here on those indicators which of your lamps on the outside are lighting up. Night running, it's the 3 marker lights and the white light on the left side, on the outside of the track. Day running, you have the white light on the right side in the middle of the track. Yard work, you would only have the 3 marker lights, and with off, everything is off. Since we are running on day, we put it to day running, and I'm sitting down, and from outside you can see those thingies, light, light, light. So those rectangular one and the one in the middle are the 3 marker lights, and this is the light that indicates the day running, or here on the other side for the night running. And to make it complete, the tail lights would be those. Here you can see them. And they should actually switch the ones on your cap, on the side that you're sitting in, not on the other side. What is still there to do? We have our QTron, our data card 6100, and this is functional in the game insofar as a train length counter, like a Roadster Runner system, AJ, works here. So if you check, and now I'm coming back to your question, how much do we weigh? We have 1714.8 tons gross weight of the train, and we are long 286.3 yards. This is the figure that we need to punch into our train length counter so that the train knows how long it is, and we have to insert it in feet, and this is a number in yards, so we will have to multiply it by 3 because there are 3 feet to the yard as far as I am familiar with the imperial units. So I will just multiply it by 3. That is approximately 870, and this is what we punch in here. We select the 1 is train length, and then enter 870 feet, enter again, and then we have primed our train length counter. We can look at this thing here, electromotive. This is the EM2000 computer. We have a data meter. If we select that, we can see some stats about our engine. We can see the throttle position, what is in idle at the moment. We can especially see the rotations per minute that the prime mover is doing, 200 if it is idling. What is important to see if the engine is actually running. So you can see it is running here. And what else does this thing allow here? We have a unit information where you can see what unit you are sitting in. It is the 66019. If we look on the outside, it is actually the 66019. So that is not that important here. We can see how much fuel we have. Typically we don't drive that much, so that we have to refuel. But it should actually work. We could cut out some traction motors. We don't want to do that. We could switch English, Imperial and metric system. We don't want to do that. It has a slow speed feature that works up to 10 miles. If you want to load or unload your stuff, this comes in handy. I won't cover this today, maybe in a different stream. But what is important, you can switch the brake timing here. What actually works like this in real life if you read the manuals, but only on the more modern units. The older units have switch in the engine room where you can do that, but on the newer ones you can do it with this computer here. At the moment we are set to goods timing. We can switch it to passenger timing, then it would change the indicators here. But for the moment we leave it to goods maybe. We will come to that goods and passenger timing in the presentation in some minutes, and what is it good for. What you also can do is to cut in and cut out brakes. Brakes are cut in, that is good because we want to drive from that. That thing here is a speaker for the radio. It does not have a GMSR, but NRN, what is it, National Radio Network radio. That is not functional in except for the banking com button. So I don't know if it actually works like on the units on Sandpatch Grade, that you can operate units on the end of the train with a banking com button. It actually has this button. If it works, I have never tried it out because I've never found a service where we had units at the end of our train. Those are the indicators we have seen for DSD and AWS isolation. There is one for wheel slips, there's one for fire in the engine, what I've never seen lighting up, funny enough, in the game. There is one for a general fault. If something happens, typically if you switch around the switches in the fuse box, you can generate that. And what was the last one? Don't know. Typically if you would test them in real life, you would press those thingies and then they light up, so you know that the lamp in it works. This does not work in the game here. This is the indicator. We have seen that for the light panel on the outside of the locomotive. We are in day running mode. That is good. So we have tested our stuff. We can also test maybe the windscreen wipers if they work. We have set the hot plate to off. This is the hot plate, so if you want to warm your soup that your husband or your wife gave you on your journey, then you can heat it in this hot plate. And the washers you would test, but the washers don't work in the game. This is the telephone to contact the signaler. This is our brake system here mostly. There's other things like the hazard lights. Yeah, we should test the hazard lights too. Let's see what the hazard lights look like. So if you have a problem with your train, you have to switch on the hazard lights, and this is what they look like. Those buttons, they totally look like those on the engines in Sandpatch Grade, right? On the American diesel electric locomotives. They need to be on as long as the train is running. For starting up, you need to switch this one on, and this is the isolation switch. If you start the engine, you can isolate the rest of the locomotive from it. Yeah, to get this train going, you would have to charge the brake system. At the moment, the brake pipe is empty, so all the brakes are fastened in the train. To release it, you have this lever here. You have an electro-pneumatic brake system here, so you're sending electric impulses to control the air pipe, and the air pipe controls the brake distributors along the train. So what would you probably do to test your brakes on the train? You would switch on the parking brake first, so that your train does not run away as long as you're testing the brakes. And how do you do that? You have two buttons here for parking brake on and parking brake off, and at the moment it is off. This is what this indicator tells you. So I'm switching the parking brake on. Actually, if it is on, this EMD tells us parking brake applied. So this tells us something what happens on the train. You can actually see the parking brake. It is modeled here on this thingy. It's this chain. This is the parking brake. This, if it is fastened, this chain is pulled to the front, and then you can see, yep, the parking brake is actually applied. It is not totally animated. Sometimes I have the feeling that this chain moves around if you release the parking brake. Sometimes this part of the chain is missing, but it is in the model at least. But you cannot release it from outside, what is possible in real life as far as I know. Okay, now we've set on the parking brakes, and we can just fill our brake pipe with air. This is the indicator for... No, does not do anything. This is the indicator for the brake pipe here, and this is actually two gauges, and one in the middle. The hand tells you how much pressure you have in your brake pipe. This is 5 bars or 0 at this point. And here on the outside, I show you again so that you can see it. On the outside there is an extra indicator that tells you the pressure in the equalizing reservoir. So actually you're controlling the pressure in the equalizing reservoir, and the brake pipe, the whole brake pipe, follows the pressure in the equalizing reservoir. And what you have on this locomotive, what is pretty nice, because you don't have it on a lot of locomotives, is this airflow indicator here. You can see how much traffic there is in your brake pipe, how much pressure change there travels to and fro in the train pipe. So if I release the brakes or if I fasten them, now I am applying them, and now I am releasing them, and you can see that this generates a lot of traffic at first, and then it goes towards 0, and that indicates how along the train the brakes in the cars are releasing. As long as there is still some traffic happening, then you know that not all of the brakes in your cars have released. If there is nothing happening in the brake pipe anymore, you can be pretty sure that all the brakes in your cars have released, and you can accelerate your train without running into the brakes on your cars. This tells you about the brake cylinder pressure on the locomotive alone. You have 2 bogies, 2 trucks. The thing with the axles here you have on the front end. Let's maybe look at it from the other side. 3 axles in this bogie, 3 axles in that bogie. And every bogie has a brake distributor, and when we're applying the brakes, then you can see that the pressure increases. It goes quite slowly as long as we're in goods. It goes faster if we are in passenger timing, and this is actually the difference between passenger and goods timing, the speed with which the brake cylinders fill and get drained. Releasing the brakes, a lot of traffic in the airflow meter, and on the locomotive, on the brake cylinders, the pressure drops. And from the airflow meter you can see that this is what happens alongside the train. This is the main reservoir and the main reservoir pipe. This typically is not very interesting when running the train, because that has to stay on its readings, and if you lose the pressure here, then you have to stop, because then your brake system doesn't work anymore properly. Here you have an ammeter. You can see how much power you are applying with your train. So what do we do to test the brake system? We have set the parking brake on. We have released the brakes. We have set the independent brake, the brake that only brakes the locomotive, to release. So brakes are released at the moment. If you just tip this lever once, you go into the initial reduction. The brake pipe pressure drops to 4.7, and you get like 0.5 bar in the brake cylinders. And if you want to apply more, you have to hold this lever to apply. You can see it always switches back to the middle setting if you let go of it. So if you want to change the pressure in the brake pipe, you have to either put it to release or put it to apply, and then you apply more or less brake force on your train, and you can see it here on your locomotive. You can't see it what is happening in the cars, but you get an idea of what is happening in the cars from the airflow meter. If the airflow meter shows 0, then the cars should be at the same standard as the locomotive, more or less. So what would you do? You reduce it a bit more, and then you reduce it to the max. So you apply the brakes maximum. This is a normal brake application, 3.4 about, and you get a brake cylinder pressure of about 4.6 or something. And if that holds, and you know, okay, the automatic brake seems to work, then you test your emergency brakes, and the emergency brakes, you just hit this plunger poof, emergency brakes applied, and you can see that the brake pipe pressure drops to 0 here on the brake pipe first, and in this case the equalizing reservoir follows, because we are opening the brake pipe with this plunger and letting all the air out of the brake pipe, so the brake pipe is the one that gets first. If you want to recover after an emergency brake operation, then you have to keep in mind that you have to pull this plunger out again, otherwise you won't be able to release. So if this is still in and you try to release the brake, nothing happens. You have to get the plunger out again, and then you can release the brake again. We release the automatics, wait for the brake cylinders to drain. You can see how the airflow meter goes down to 0, so that we can see the cars are following suit. And then we can test our direct brake with what we can brake the locomotive alone. It has 3 settings too. It has a hold in the middle, it has a release, and it has an apply. And contrary to the automatic brake, this handle does not snap back into the hold position, but it stays where you put it. So if you put it to apply, you can see we're applying pressure in the brake cylinders of the locomotive alone and releasing it again. Nothing is happening in the brake pipe here. Brake pipe reading stays where it is. There is nothing happening on the airflow meter. This is just controlling the brake cylinders in the locomotive. Yeah, that is about the brake test. Obviously in real life you would test a lot of more things, but that is about that. If you want to play a bit and test the brake system and understand those gauges. So what we would do to actually start the train, obviously we have to release our parking brake, but before we do that we apply the direct brake to hold the train with the locomotive. Then we can release the parking brake, it goes to off. We get a crew message here, parking brake is released. You can just say okay, we're fine with that, and then obviously we would switch the reverser to forward. Then in real life I think you would test your vigilance system, but this does not work as it is supposed to work, because if you stand up and have the reverser to forward, you should get an alarm after a couple of seconds, but you don't get that. In the network 365 it works. You can see this on our video about the DSD vigilance, AWS and DRA systems that we have on our channel. So after all this talk, let's drive this train. We have put the reverser to forward. We release our independent brake, and as the reading in the brake cylinders drops, we apply some traction force, notching it up to maximum 3, and you can see, what the fuck, we hear a screeching noise. The train is not really accelerating. What is the problem here? We have 2 locomotives, can't we go a bit faster? Let's check. Let's stop this service here. This can't be like this. So I'm applying the train brakes in full. Also this, I'm contacting the signaller, telling him I have a problem with my train. I have to check what is happening here. One thing that can actually give you trouble is not so much the door, although in the driver's manual for this locomotive there are like 20 pages about how you get into your class 66 and out of it without getting yourself killed or seriously injured, because obviously you can squeeze your fingers quite easily in those doors and everything. Let's check our back cap. Is anything amiss in the back cap? Well, the brake is released. The plunger for the emergency brakes is closed. the lever for the direct brake is in release. Those are the things that can actually interfere with the other cap. So if you put the direct brake into apply here on this cap, then we will feel this on the other one. Same with the plunger here, but no problem. This cap looks good. What is it with our second locomotive that they gave us to help us so that we don't have to pull everything alone? It is supposed to work in multiple unit mode. It should just copy what we are doing and apply power. But the first thing that we see, what is that? The parking brake is on. So we are pulling this locomotive with its parking brake on. This can't work. So obviously this is probably what is giving us the screeching sound. The next thing is we have good setting in the front locomotive, passenger setting on the back end locomotive. That is not good either. And let's have a look at the data meter here. Engine rotations per minute 0. This engine is not even running. So to help us, they gave us a second locomotive, but they found it a good idea to not even start it and to have its parking brake on. This can't really work like this. So what would we have to do? Release the parking brake on the second locomotive and adjust the brake timing so that both locomotives are running with the same brake timing. The security systems, safety systems, we don't need them on the second locomotive, obviously. And then we have to start it. So how do we start the locomotive? There is an engine start button here. But if we just push the engine start button, it would not work. The problem is we need first to set the switch in the correct position, start, stop, isolate. That is actually the correct position. And then we have to turn the fuel pump on. So this is the only switch that has to go into the on position to start the train, because otherwise the engine will not get any fuel if the fuel pump is not on, right? Then pushing the engine start button does not do anything. And then we need to put in our key, our reverser. The reverser handle is like the ignition key on your car. Without that, the train won't react. So this switch to start, stop, isolate. This switch to on for the fuel pump and the reverser in, and then it should actually start our engine. You hear the honking and you hear the prime mover start. So probably, and we can see on our data meter now we're talking. Now it is running with 235 rotations per minute. What we need to do now, we put this isolation switch into run, because now it is actually supposed to run, and then we can put those to on too, that the train is running, and we take the reverser key. So now this unit should be set up properly for multi-unit use, and it can help us. So the brakes are obviously cut out here, hopefully, so that they don't interfere with our operation. Yeah, they are cut out. That is what we want to have. And then we can leave this cap here. If it works now, everything is good. We don't necessarily need to check the fourth cap, but you can see this is what they sent you on the road with, and if you just start driving, you will have a hard time because you have a screeching dead engine. At your back. And now if we put the external camera in a position where we can see, now we can see the cap on the second locomotive, it is set to off on the parking brake. This should not hinder us anymore. And now we can see the amp meter and can see if it is actually helping us by applying power. Okay, signaler, I had to restart my second engine. Now I'm good to go. I will be clearing the line. Sorry for sitting around so long. So again, direct brake apply, releasing the train brakes, and then we can try again. As long as there is airflow activity, you don't need to start. If it drops below 2 or 1 liter per second, then we can go on with releasing the direct brake, applying some power. That sounds much better. We don't have any screeching, and we can see on the ammeter on the second locomotive now it is actually pitching in. So multi-unit action on this service, what is great, it is the only service where you have a train with multiple units, in this DLC at least. But the setup is for you to find out. And now we can accelerate our train. You can see the smoke coming out of the chimney on both locomotives, indicating that both are running. And now let's try to get this thing up to speed. Just like the locomotives on Sandpatch Grade, we have 8 notches on our throttle here. The operating manual tells you that you should not really use notch 8 unless, well, you are really in a position where you have to make up time. Usually you should be fine with throttle 7. To be fair, in the game, to stay on a timetable, you usually have to use the notch 8 too. What happened here? Another thing that is a bit of a glitch here. You could see that the amp meter dropped to 0 as soon as we got to 33 miles per hour. That is a weird glitch that is on this locomotive. If that happens to you, don't think you did anything wrong, because that happens all the time. Every time you're accelerating through the 33 miles, you will have a sudden loss of amps on your amp meter. You hear your engine doing this strange sound, just like on a severe wheel slip or a transition or something like this. Yeah, it does it all the time. Just ignore it, it will recover. You can see it on the speed line here. You have a slight dent in it, but yeah, you need to know this is nothing that you did wrong. But on the other hand, how fast are we actually allowed to go? We are at 45 now. What is the top speed for our freight train? What does it show on this meter? It tells us to go 90. I'm not sure if that is actually how fast we can go. What do we have on our head code? We have a 7 head code, 7V00. There was something on the forum or wherever telling you that the head code is actually telling you how fast you can go on your freight train. And this is true. And this is the point where I want to switch in a presentation about freight speed limits, and where we find in the rulebook anything about the speed limit for freight trains. You might have watched the video about speed limits for freight trains in Germany, what is a very complex matter and complicated to calculate depending on load, on gradient, on a lot of things. Obviously it can't be less complicated in the United Kingdom, and I did not find that many sources as for the German system, but at least I found some. And from the Rail and Safety Standards Board, who issue the train driver manual, you can download a lot of sources, including the train driver manual. And I gave you here on the bottom of my presentation always the module in the train driver manual where I got my intel from. So if you want to read it up, you are free to do that and correct me if I understood anything wrong or not, or if you want to just read on. So those are very interesting sources, and I think you can find out a lot of stuff that you can actually use in the game to make it more interesting. So how do you find out how fast your train can travel? First thing is you can look at your head code. This is this numeral, letter, and then 2 digits numerals that you have on most of the British trains, and from the first digit you can typically see what kind of a train you are. And on freight trains you can actually see how fast they can travel. This is the module TW1 section 6. It gives you speed limits for certain codes of or certain classes of trains, or actually it gives you the classification of those trains. And a head code starting with a 4 is a freight train that is allowed to travel 75 miles per hour. Train with a head code 6 is a freight train that is allowed to travel 60 miles per hour, 7 45 miles, and 8 35 miles per hour. So from your head code alone you can see in what class you are running your train, and if you are a freight train you can see what the general speed limit is. And if you remember, we are running a head code 7 train, and so we are limited to 45 miles according to the classification. If we had a head code with a 6 like here, we could go 60. So this is for the game a first indication what your ceiling speed is. So we are actually not allowed to travel faster than 45 miles. Excuse me. Head code 0 would be a light engine run, either just one light engine without any cars, or a convoy of one engine carrying or towing other engines to take them to a different place where they are needed. There is one run in the Brighton Main Line where you move 4 engines. This is one with a head code 0. There are some very high priority freight trains. If you are an authorized freight train or a parcel train or one of the railhead treatment trains, the class 66 has the railhead treatment variant in the DLC, not in the DLC, in the game. It is one of the newer locomotives that you could buy a couple of months ago. They get number 3 head code, and there are super special important postal or parcel trains that carry parcels or post mail, and they can be nominated and run in class 1. So typically as a dispatcher you have a hierarchy of trains, which of the trains are supposed to go first and which trains have to wait, and typically the number 1 trains, the number 3 trains go before 4, 6, 7, 8. So which numbers are missing here? The number 2, it is the regular passenger trains, so not the express trains. The number 1 is not only nominated postal and parcel, it's also the express passenger trains. 2 is normal passenger trains. 4, 5 is missing. 5 are empty coach moves, so empty passenger vehicles that are towed around. And 9 would be the Eurostar. The Eurostar has a number of its own. There's a 9 head code in this system. What is important for us in the game, if you're starting a service and you see the head code that is given, you already have for your freight train your ceiling speed. And even if the game gives you higher speeds, if you want to play it a bit more realistically, or more that it seems a bit more realistic, you can see or have a look at the ceiling speed here and not go faster than the ceiling speed gives you. And we are on a train with a head code 7, so we won't go faster than 45 miles here. What do we know from this about our brake setting? When are we allowed to set the brakes to passenger? When are we allowed to set them to goods? There is not so much what is actually necessary and what you can get out of the head code, but one thing you can know: if you are running a class 4 train with a head code 4, then you always have to set your brakes to passenger, not to goods. This is mandatory. On the other trains here, like 6, 7 or 8, it depends on what you're actually carrying in your train. The general rule is the heavier your train is and the higher your category number-wise. The slower your speed, the heavier your train, the more likely it is that you have to set your your brakes to goods and not to passenger. If you're carrying empty cars, you should probably be allowed to run them with passenger settings. If you are running loaded cars, you would have to put them to goods typically, so that the brakes are slower, but yeah, as a rule you have to have all the same settings throughout the whole train. There are some rules how to cover exceptions for that, but as a rule it should be the same setting for all the cars and all the locomotives. This is why I set our second locomotive to goods, just we had on the front locomotive. And yeah, there are some cars like in the German cars, in the German DLCs, where you can switch between G and P brake settings, but I don't think that there are UK freight cars in the game so far that have working brake selectors for that, so you don't have to bother with that. That is one thing. Head code, how fast can we go with a certain head code? Let's just take a break from the presentation here and drive on. This is why we are not going faster than 45. And this makes it a quite relaxed run, because in the beginning we just go on with our 45 and we don't have to accelerate or slow down according to all those changes in speed limit, since we can't go faster than 45 anyway. We have to adjust a bit our traction force to the gradient and keep it between 40 and 45 on the speed clock. Now we are passing Haywards Heath station. With a speed clock on this train, you need to be a bit careful, because sometimes you are actually going faster than the speed clock shows to you. Like with 30 or 20 miles, you should always keep a bit of a margin of safety. Let's warn the people on the platform with the horn. But isn't that a nice change to driving the Electrostar on this line here? You can actually enjoy the panorama view from this cab. And since we're going so slow, we will be overtaking by some trains. Other trains will pass us, and we can really enjoy all the traffic that is happening here on the Brighton Main Line. What is, thanks to Joe the Fish, one of the busiest lines, the busiest timetable, or most probably the busiest timetable in the game. We're closing in on a part of the track where we can branch off to Ardingly. A place where you can actually spawn on foot, but where not really a lot happened so far before those additional freight services were added to the DLC. Here you can see a line branching off. Now this 377 blocks the view. Now we can see it again. This is where it is branching off. Another nice thing for those freight services is that you are running on the slow line on parts where no passenger trains are traveling actually in this DLC, through stations that have never been used by passenger trains in the DLC so far. Now we are passing the landmark Ouse Valley Viaduct, I think is the name. Very scenic. I think there's one more station, Balcomb, before we get to the tunnel, before the spot where the lines split up into the fast line and the slow line. Yeah, that is this station where you pass through this arch before you pass the station. I think that it is not. Yeah, it looks like it. No, I was mistaken. Maybe it still comes. Always be ready to check if your second unit is still pitching in. Yeah, finally Balcomb. First the arch, then the station. So, we have talked about the head code and how you can see from the head code how fast you can go. Obviously, we did it the other way around because typically someone is calculating your maximum speed and then you get a head code and a classification that corresponds with those calculations, not the other way around. This is why I tried to find out how you can actually determine the speed of your train, the maximum speed of your train, before you get your head code according to this determination. And for that, I have a second part of the presentation. I have to turn it on again, I guess. Yes. Like, what else do we have to take into view when we are determining whether a train can go on a certain line and with what speed it can go on this line? There are some parameters at first that determine whether a train can go on a certain part of track at all. That is maximum length, maximum weight, and the maximum route availability of the train. So these are three numbers that every section of track has and tells us the maximum length of a train traveling on this piece of track is so and so meters, the maximum weight is so and so many tons, and the maximum route availability that a train or a vehicle can have is like 7 or 8 or 6 or 2. We will see what that is, route availability. For example, route availability is more or less a rating of how good the track is and how much train, how much weight it can support. Route availability rating of 1 would be the worst track, route availability rating of 10 would be the best track that can support really heavy vehicles. So if you have a piece of track, then you have a route availability rating of 7 for this part of it and a route availability rating of 9 for that, and every vehicle has a route availability rating on its own and tells you what quality of track it needs, so that everything is good and that you don't need to be concerned that the vehicle will destroy the track. So our Class 66, for example, has a route availability rating of 7, so it needs minimum 7 on the track. Some vehicles have less, and maybe this car has a route availability rating of 9. And this obviously is a problem, because on the track or on the route that you want to travel, the lowest route availability rating is what takes the cake, and on the train the one with the highest is the one that you have to look at. And if the highest rating on the train is higher than the lowest rating on the track, then your train cannot go there, or it needs a special permit to go there, but typically it can't because the track cannot support this vehicle with a route availability rating. Excuse me. And how do you know all this data about your train? Yes, I have some water, thank you. I hope this will do the trick. How do you get all the data for your train? There is a system that is called TOPS, Total Operations Processing System. that was introduced already in the 1960s, I think, and this system has all the data about all the vehicles that all the railway operators are using in the system. And if you punch in the numbers for the locos and the vehicles, then this system can calculate the length and the weight and the route availability and the maximum speed and all the other things that you need to run this train. And then this TOPS system produces a train document telling you all those things. And as a train preparer, you more or less have to do that on your TOPS reporting point. This is the TRP. And then you get a document. This sounds, or this looks, from what I've seen, quite old school, because this system is a really old operating system, and it's amazing that it is still in use, obviously. Written in IBM assembler macros, from what I've read. So, yeah, really old-fashioned. And what the train preparer has to do according to this train document, he has more or less to check that the train that is sitting in front of his nose is actually the train that the document is about. He or she has to compare all the wagon and vehicle numbers and check if they are coupled in the sequence that the train document thinks that they are coupled, and so on. So, as a driver, you would get this train document and have all the data about your train, and the train preparer checks if the train can actually run this route. For us in the game, it is obviously more interesting what data we can use to determine to get our maximum speeds and stuff. So what do we do? What would we have to do in real life if for some reason we do not have a train document that is created by this system TOPS? Then the train preparer first would have to try to get one. If he doesn't have one, and he would have to call his colleague or her colleague at a different TOPS reporting point and try to get a document from this colleague and then do the check. If for some reason this does not work, he can be required to produce a train document on his own, and the section 4 in the module TW4 in the rulebook provides you with some interesting rules for preparing this train document. And for that they actually have to look at the vehicles and try to find out all the data according to the markings on the vehicles. And this is something that we can do in the game. We can look at the vehicles and we can try to figure out to build more or less a train document on our own, because obviously in the game we don't have a TOPS document. In the game we cannot call the colleague, so we are in the situation where we would have to try to produce a train document on our own. And for that, one thing on locomotives, they always have data panels. If I just switch back to the game for a second and have a look on our locomotives, we can find a data panel of that kind. For example, here. Go back to the presentation so that we don't run into something in the game. A panel of that kind is more or less on every piece of locomotive or a multiple unit, and it tells you what kind of locomotive it is. In our case, the class 66, it would tell you what end you're looking at, if you're looking at the A cab end or the B cab end. And I have to spoil something here in the game. The artist missed that a bit, because we have two A ends on our class 66, at least in the EWS livery. So you will find on both cab ends an A, although one of them should be B. And then you find some data that you can use for producing your pseudo train document on your own. You have the tonnage of the vehicle, how heavy it is supposed to be, 127 tons for the class 66, and you get the route availability rating for your vehicle from this panel. And there are other indications that we don't need in this context here. We will get to them on another slide. And those things you can get from the markings on your locomotive. On the cars, you would have panels like this telling you what kind of a car it is, in this case a KFA trailer, and you have two pieces of information about the weight of the car. The first one, the car tells you how heavy it is if it is empty. That is the tare weight. And this is something that should be plated on every wagon. It tells you this is the weight of the car if there is no load in it. Obviously the load you don't know, because the load varies. It is different every time, so it cannot be plated on the car. But in general, if you add the load to the tare weight, you get the gross laden weight. But before that, what is given on the plate is typically the maximum load that this car can have. So if you add the tare weight and the load, you get the gross laden weight, the GLW, for that car, and this is the highest weight that this car can have if it is fully loaded. So you would add those two figures, and then you get the highest weight that this car can have. Obviously, if it is empty, it has the tare. If it is loaded, it can maximal tops can be tare plus the maximum capacity. And the system for producing your train dock, if you don't know it, it all works more or less after the principle err on the side of caution, assume the worst. If you don't know if the car is loaded or not, assume it is loaded. If you don't know the load of the car, assume it has its maximum load. So if you don't know about the status of the load in your car, you would just add those two figures and assume that it is fully loaded. And then you have some tables, for example, where you can guess the route availability rating according to how many axles the car has and how heavy it is. And so you can more or less find a train document without the TOPS system, and we can try to do that in the game as well, for maximum length, maximum weight, and the route availability. Obviously it is not so funny to find out whether a train can run the service at all, because we have to run it by the game. But we can do the same thing with the maximum speed as well. Obviously there are more rules to do that than those that I just quoted here, but you get the general principle how it is done. For the maximum speed, what is one part that is interesting for us? Obviously there is a maximum speed that each vehicle in the train can run. For example, the locomotive can run 75, this car can go 75, this car can go only 60, this car can go only 55, and this can go 75 again. So which one is the one that tells us how fast the train can go? Of course, the one with the slowest maximum speed. This car slows down the whole train to 55. The same system with the tops works here as well. Typically the maximum speed of all the vehicles and the train is in the train document that is created by TOPS, and you should get a TOPS document. If you don't get it from your own TRP, you should get it from your colleague. And again, there is a procedure how to find that out for your homegrown terrain document and what we can use in our game. For the locomotives, we have given it in our capside data panel. It tells us the maximum speed in miles per hour for the locomotive, alongside with the other data that we have used or will use. For the cars, it is not so easy. Typically the cars have no plated speed on them, and the rule book refers you to the instructions that you got from your company, or you have to ask the control of your company how fast those cars can go and to figure it out. So again, we can only figure it out for the locomotives in the game because the cars are not plated with it. Last thing in this context, sufficient brake force. You might remember that in the German context we have talked a lot about Bremshundertstel and stuff like that. That is the brake force in German trains, brake percentages, and this is pretty much the same here. This way around. Each vehicle has a rating in tons that tells us about the braking capacity, about the braking force that this vehicle has, and if they add all of them together, then we will get the brake force for the train, like in our example here, the 222 tons. And this is an interesting fact that we have to take into account for finding out how fast the train can go. Again, everything should be in the TOPS document. The TOPS system should know the brake force of each vehicle, in which conditions and so on. And the train preparer will just have to check if the brake force that is given by the system allows to run with a certain speed on a certain line. If we have to find it out with the system for producing our own train document, we can look at the indication on the cab side data panel on the locomotive to find out the brake force for the locomotive. The cars, again, I have found this on one car. I don't really know how to read that and how to calculate the brake force for that. If anyone knows how to calculate that and how to read that here, it is a KFA wagon, for example. Please tell me in the comments, because I have not managed to figure out what those numbers mean and how to calculate the brake force out of them. Typically you don't have a plated brake force on the wagons, but what you can do, and there is a system given in this section 4 of the module TW4, you can calculate a brake force from the tare weight. If you don't know better, you just take the tare weight of the car divided by 2 and you get its brake force that you can put into your train document. And this is actually something that we can do in the game. We can look at our models, or we can operate the numbers a bit to find out what brake force our train should have by looking at the tare weight of our cars. And I have to admit that it is a bit of it is not very exact, because the game does not always give you the correct numbers, or not numbers that agree. So sometimes you have cars that give you a tare weight, a certain plated tare weight, and then you look on your pause screen and try to do the maths, add the locomotive divided by the number of cars that you have, and you end up with a different value. And this is a thing that I think is because the game does not calculate those numbers for each car on its own, but it has those numbers somehow stored for the whole formation. So this is why the weights and lengths for cars sometimes seem to vary depending on whether you have just one car or 20 of them in your train. But in general, this is possible. By this rule here and the markings on the locomotive, you can find a brake force rating for your train. And then from the data given in the pause screen, you can calculate your load by calculating the weight of the empty train, and then subtracting this from the figure that it's given to you in the pause screen for the gross weight of the train, and then you can calculate the load, and then you can look into the magic table E1 that tells you how fast you can go with a certain brake force and a certain load. And you read it like this. Like in our example, we have 220 tons brake force. You go to the row that is just below your number, if it is not the exact number. So if we don't have a marking for 222, you go to the next lower number, and then you can check. You can always see how much load you can have in your train and still go the speed that is given on top of it. So if we end up with a load for, let's say, 1,100 tons, you could see I can run 45. No, I can't. I can run 40 only, because I have less than 1,190, but I have more than 1,045, and so on. If you have a load of 900, you can run 50 because you have less than the 935, but you can't run 55 because you have more load than 840. And so you would read this table here. And this is what you can actually use in the game to estimate the brake force of your train and calculate the load, and then find a speed for that. I've done this for our train in an Excel calculation, for example here. From the pause screen, I have taken this number here, 1,714.8 tons AJ. This is our gross weight of the train. Then I have just read what the plate on the cars tells us about the tare weight of the wagons, and multiplied it with the number of wagons that we have, gives that number. I have multiplied the 2 locomotives that we have, that gives us a weight of 127, and then I have the tare weight of the whole train. I subtract this figure from the gross train weight figure, get this load. Those are 1,093 tons, and here I have done this thing with brake force is equals tare weight by 2, so each wagon has 22 point something, so this ends up with 11 tons brake force per wagon. 16 wagons gives 176 tons brake force for the wagons, and the marked 68 times 2 for the locomotives. We have 312 tons brake force on our trains, and we have a load of 1,093. And if we look into the table, we would find here in the row for 310 we can run with a load of 1,093 tons 55. Because we have more than 10,050, we cannot run 60, but we have less than 1,185, can run 55. So the rating of 45 that we have from the head code is approximately what we get to when we do this calculation for the brake force and the load and the maximum velocity that results from that. Going back to the train. Are you still awake, AJ? That is good. After this tunnel we will be going downhill, so I'm reducing the power. In the operation manual you can read that you should not switch to 0 on your throttle without pausing in notch 1 for a bit. This is what I'm trying to do here. And since we are limited to 45 anyway, we don't need to pay attention to the reduction in speed limit from 90 to 80 here. And neither do we need to be concerned about the fact that we are going across a switch on the slow line that limits us to 70 as a passenger train. Can see that the direction indicator is on this signal, telling us we're switching to the left to the slow lane. As a passenger train we would be allowed to go back to 90 starting from here. But this is the part where the slow line is branching off before we get to Three Bridges and Gatwick Airport. And you can see that the next relevant reduction in speed limit will be not before we get to Gatwick Airport. So the only relevant speed limit for us is our own limit of 45 that we can already read out of our head code. Closing in on the Three Bridges area. Slowing down a bit because we're running downhill. There is actually a lot of yard and sidings at Three Bridges. There are some services where you can start empty coach moves. Gatwick Express overtaking. There must have been a lot of trains queuing behind us because it took us so long to start. But it's sometimes a nice idea to delay your start so that you get a lot of traffic on the road, and you never know what will happen signal wise. Now the Three Bridges station. And this part of the track you're usually never on with your passenger trains, because all the passenger services in the DLC from Brighton to the north are running on the fast lane here. There are only a couple of empty coach moves starting at 3 bridges that are going along those lines. Also the other way around. Typically the only trains that run on the slow line south of East Croydon, they go to Reigate, so they diverge to Reigate after Redhill, but they don't go on through Earlswood and Horley. But the freight trains do. If you want to earn a lot of experience points, then those services are not for you to choose, because the only thing that you have on your list is the stop at the end of the service, and in the meantime you will get only the points for driving below speed limit. But sometimes there is some signaling action. You actually have to wait at signals, or at least to slow down. And on the second half you also have to take care of some speed restrictions. Now we're closing in on Gatwick. Enjoy the 377 next to us. It just was allowed to go into the station. Probably had to wait for the Gatwick Express train. Yeah, I really love those services. You might consider them a bit boring because you're running with the same speed all the time, but they are extremely relaxing, in my opinion. Passing Horley. And again, you can see there is no speed limit incoming. Now we have to apply some throttle again, since we are running uphill. In the operating manual they actually tell you that you should accelerate and get your throttle up before you get to the ascent. So you would have to drop below speed limit and then more or less go with a running start into the ascent, so that you don't have to accelerate in the ascent. So what was interesting for me was actually to read up about the history of the Class 66, and as a dilettante that I am, when I first got this Class 66 in this game here, I thought, why does this locomotive look like an American locomotive with this command stand here, those switches, all those handles? They look just like the diesel electric locomotives that you have in sandpatch grade. And this is actually not really surprising, because the Class 66 is essentially an American diesel electric locomotive. It is built by AMD at the time. Electromotive Diesel, formerly Electromotive Division of General Motors. Now they have a different name. I read it up, I forgot it. It's a totally different name now, but the EMD brand is still on, and it has been built in London, Ontario in Canada, in the plant of EMD, for the European market, for the market in the UK, according to specifications that we need here. Yeah, the dogs are jumping around and trying to entice me to jump with them. And the English, Welsh and Scottish Railway, they brought this design into the United Kingdom. Some were sold to continental Europe, but a lot of them returned to the UK after that and are still in use. And from what you can read, those locomotives are actually very inconvenient to work on them, because they are loud and they are hot and they are a general mayhem to operate. So I'm slowing down because we got a double yellow. As a freight train, you always have to react to the double yellows, because you can't slow down so fast. And I let the gradient stop us a bit. And we have a single yellow here, so I actually have to slow down even more so that we get to the next signal with a speed that allows us to actually stop the train if it is red. The driver assist always interferes when the brakes are not fully released. But sometimes you have to apply some throttle even if the brakes are not fully released to prevent the train from stalling or to stretch your train. Stretch braking. You would accelerate your train into the brakes. So this is actually the spot where the two lanes split up. On the right with the Gatwick Express you can see the fast lane going into the tunnel, and we are going on the left with the slow line. And you can see that the signal has cleared and it is green again, so we can accelerate. The sender actually works on this locomotive. You can see that impressively if you get wheel slips because of snow or something. The sender does the trick sometimes to give you more adhesion. So if you want to accelerate, especially uphill in snowy conditions, you can use the sender. Even if the conditions are not snowy, you can use it. When you read the operation manual, then the sanding should happen automatically as soon as you are traveling faster than 9 miles. So the manual sanding should only work with speeds of 9 miles or slower. But from what I experienced, you can totally see a difference. This is Redhill. To the left was the line to Reigate, and we are using the through line where we don't have to pass a platform directly, and the signals are green again, so we can accelerate. Now we're getting wheel slips with the notch 8. This is why they always warn you about the notch 8. I should have stayed with the notch 7. And we're still in the section where the slow line is disconnected from the fast line. And where there are a lot of changes in speed limit if you are a passenger train. And I think there are no passenger trains that run the slow line in this direction at all. Oh no, obviously the trains that come from Reigate, they run it. But up to Redhill, I don't think that there are regular passenger services. So it seems we're not getting any snow so far. But we're still 14 miles to go, so maybe we will get snow then. There's some snow in real life. Oh, that's nice. I will enjoy the snow with the dogs then when I take them out after the stream. This should be Merstham here, and then we will going into the Merstham tunnel. Like so often after the tunnel there will be a descent, so I'm getting down my throttle to notch 1 so that I can have the train run in notch 1 a bit, lose a bit speed so that I have a cushion when the train is accelerating on the other end of the tunnel. Well, yeah, everything takes time when you are a freight train. Everything takes longer than expected. This is night for relaxing train driving. So, we're out of the tunnel. We have one more station until we reunite with the fast line. We're closing in on the point where the fast line is crossing the slow line on the bridge. If we are lucky, then we will actually get a train on the bridge the moment that we are. Yeah, you can see it on the horizon actually. There's a train running from the left to the right. But maybe this was too far away and you cannot see that on this on the stream. Here is the bridge where the fast line is coming from the right, going to the left, so it's switching sides. And then is running parallel on the left side. And we are going through Coulsden South station and then towards Purley, and there we reunite with the fast line. This is one of the elements why I like this DLC so much, because the fast and the slow line are not just running next to each other, but they are disconnecting, changing sides, reconnecting, merging south of 3 bridges. That is really a nice design. Yeah, we've already talked about the fact that this is more or less a North American diesel electric locomotive. It has a code according to the American classification, JT42CW or something like that. And the prime mover, the traction motors, all that stuff, all the traction stuff is American stuff. And this is why the control stand looks like a locomotive from Sandpatch grade. That was Coulsden South, and now we're going towards Purley. And in Purley, do we have to slow down? No, we don't have to slow down. Not before we get to East Croydon and on the loop towards Selhurst. Selhurst? Can't see it. So traction is from America. The brake system, on the other hand, is, you can see that at once it doesn't look like the stuff that you have on the American trains. It is called a PBL brake system. What is, as far as I was able to find out, short for Poussoir Bouton Locomotive. What does not only sound French, but is French design. And was first used on a British locomotive, I think on a class 58, if I'm not mistaken. And from what it does, it is quite close to what the brake system on a Trax 2 locomotive does, in my opinion, because you have brake lever that controls the pressure in the equalizing reservoir by sending electric signals. And only the emergency brake application is fully pneumatic, meaning that you drain the brake pipe directly with a valve. All the rest is controlled by a brake computer, and with valves that can adjust to the electric impulses. And this is why you have this joystick style thingy where you can apply more or apply less brakes, so you can lap them, but very conveniently. And at least in the simulation here, this works very conveniently. Unlike the valves on the trucks locomotives, you don't set it into a certain notch, but you just increase it or decrease it. So you have a manually lapping brake system, not an automatically lapping brake system, but it is both electro-pneumatic. That should be South Croydon here. Don't walk so close to the edge, guy. And unlike the brake valve in the tracks 2, you cannot yank the lever into emergency. All you can do on that front is to hit the plunger. What for game purposes is quite convenient, because you cannot just push the lever into emergency by mistake. Ah, that was not South Croydon, that was Purley Oaks, what we just ran through. I forgot Purley Oaks. And you can see most of the time the train is actually just coasting without any throttle applied. That's South Croydon here. I'm just applying initial reduction every now and then to keep the speed below the 45. Now we're running into South Croydon, into East Croydon. Green signals. You can pass the station with 45. At least we did not get any slower speed, being a freight train. But we have to prepare for going below the 45 after East Croydon. Because we have to run across the hill towards Selhurst. It does not show. And this starts with 40 and ends with a 30 reduction. So I bring down the speed below the 40 here. Then I make sure to release the brakes because we're running uphill. Actually getting a double yellow here. So I have to reduce the speed even more. Since there is a station area, the signals are in short succession. Here is the 30 reduction anyway. Okay. Single yellow. Let's do the gradient. Let the gradient do the job for us for slowing down the train. And make sure that we are approaching the signal with not more than 10 miles when we hit the AWS magnet. Is there an entry signal for Selhurst? I don't know, or is it at the end of the platform? On the right you can see Selhurst Depot, the area. And this is a very big junction here with a lot of diverging lanes. Yeah, it's actually red. We have we have a red signal before we get into Selhurst. So I slowed down the train to a very, very slow speed so that we can creep up to the signal. Always ready to actually stop the train in front of the signal. What is a bit tricky here, because we are on this hill. Part of the train is already running downhill. The end of the train might still be running uphill. But I guess we are accelerating already if I was to release the brakes fully. What does the signal say? It is not a signal that tells us not to contact the signaller, so I'm telling the signaller I'm here at the signal. And he tells us wait for the signal to change. Okay, so we are applying our brakes fully and waiting for the signal to change. And while we are waiting for the signal to change, I can actually present you with the latest part of my presentation. The permissible speed, obviously, that is connected with a certain track. So now we are leaving behind the train and we are talking about the permissible speed that comes from the track speed. There are documents that are called sectional appendices that are issued by Network Rail. Network Rail is, well, the government-owned company that owns all the tracks in the United Kingdom and manages them, and they produce documents that are called sectional appendices, where you can read up how fast any given train can run on any given section of track, and they put up those signs, and on those signs typically they display the speeds that are given in the sectional appendices. And everybody knows there are signs that have sometimes two numbers on them. That is called a differential permissible speed, and everybody knows one is freight and one is passenger. But I think it is important to know that light engines, per definition, module SP section 1, if you look it up under permissible speeds, use passenger speeds. So light engines use passenger speeds, not the freight train speeds. Also post and parcel trains, but you never are a post and parcel train in the game as far as I know. But I just put this up to bring into consideration that light engines should run on the higher speeds here. If you stumble across something that says enhanced permissible speeds, I have not seen that in the game yet, but the reason for this might be that this is applicable only for tilting trains, like the class 221 and the class 390, what is the I think Super Voyager and the Pendolino. So the tilting trains in Great Britain, they have tilting trains. We have a video about tilting trains in Germany and the GNT control system that belongs to the tilting trains, but it is obviously, well, a technology that is more or less dying, I guess. At least this is not what everybody thinks is the future of railroading. I just wanted to introduce this word enhanced permissible speeds, and that this is connected with tilting trains and not with this distinction for passenger and freight trains. This is called differential permissible speeds, and the higher one should apply to light engines as well. In the game, light engines get sometimes passenger, sometimes freight speeds, so this should be unified. Light engines should run on passenger values. This is why I put this slide up. And another thing I wanted to introduce is that there is a section 2.2 in this module SP that tells you that locomotives and trains that are hauled by locomotives as opposed to multiple units have specific speed limits even if the regular permissible speed is higher, and this applies to situations where you can go faster than 60 miles according to the permissible speed. And what interests us most is that light engines or convoys of locomotives only, regardless of the number, they fall into that category, and they are limited to 60 in parts where the permissible speed is 65 to 85. They can't go the permissible speed that is applicable normally here, but they are reduced to 60 in these areas. And in areas where you can go 90 to 100 or higher, they are restricted to 75 light engines. So light engines in our game, we have some light engine moves. You should get passenger speeds, but you should take into account that on the higher speed areas you are restricted to 60 in this part and to 75 when you can run 90 or higher. And we obviously have this on the Brighton Main Line and also on the Southeastern High Speed, and I think this should be taken into consideration. The other formations where those limits apply are not so important for the game. If you have 1 or 2 locomotives towing 1, 2, 3 coaching stock vehicles like passenger cars, it applies also, but you don't have any modern trains in the UK as far as I can see where passenger trains are hauled by locomotives. The same thing, 3 or more locomotives towing any number, typically 4 or more coaching vehicles. But it is still in the rule book. And then you have situations, 1 locomotive towing 4 to 6 passenger or post and parcel cars, then or 2 locomotives towing 4 to 10 cars of that kind. Then you have similar restrictions for areas where you can go faster than 80, faster than 90, faster than 100 or above. So just keep in mind that for locomotives running alone or in certain formations, you can have specific speed restrictions for the higher speed areas. And important in the game are the light engines, because you always get some light engine moves, and they get all kinds of speed limits. They should get passenger limits, but they should get this specific restrictions for light engine moves. I don't know if this can actually be simulated in the game, or if the game just allows a speed profile for passenger and one for freight trains, and obviously you would need a special speed profile for light engine moves or convoy moves. Would be interesting to know if anyone has any intel on that. Please leave a comment in the comments. That would be very interesting. And this is finally the end of the presentation for today, and we can go back and drive our train home, the last bit, as soon as the signal switches to green or yellow. Again, releasing the brake, you can see a lot of traffic in the airflow meter. Then releasing the independent or direct brake, greeting it with a bit of throttle before it hits the 0. Meanwhile, we get a double yellow, so probably the train that was in front of us is moving away. We are still in a 30. You can see a train coming in on the fast line. Actually, this is a very nice junction to see AI traffic from all directions. So we're not going on the fast line, obviously, we are going on the slow line. Another 377 come from the opposite direction, stopping at the station here. So is it saying, or is it Selhurst? Yeah, I was not wrong. Unfortunately, the next one is yellow, single yellow. We have to be slow. Approaching Thornton Heath. Don't get started on this AWS magnet. This is just for the speed reduction to 40 here. But we can see a red signal ahead. Is that ours or is the yellow one ours? Probably. Ah, it switched to yellow. Maybe you could see that on this on the stream. The signal switched from red to yellow. But this maybe allows me to stop in Thornton Heath. Just ask the signaller, may I stop in Thornton Heath to get out of the yellows and to showcase the signal that is buried in the brick wall. Oh, we have already gone beyond the 2-hour mark. I'm sorry, AJ. It is a long stream today. But we have only 5.6 more miles to go, then we're done. And Brighton is a long route, and I love long routes. And if you drive a long route slowly, it gets even longer. So, I ask the signaller if I'm allowed to stop here in Thornton Heath, and this is what I'm going to do. Obviously we're not stopping on the AWS magnet. But at the end of the station, the dogs have settled down a bit as well, so we might probably be able to do this. Okay, we've stopped the train here because I wanted to demonstrate that exit signal in Thornton Heath that is buried in the brick wall. For that we have to go back to the other side. Is there a way to get to the other side, or do I have to walk around my train in Thornton Heath? Probably. Oh yeah, there is this thingy to pass over the tracks, and it is actually working. And this is where the exit signal should be. You should not go here as a member of the public, but me as a member of the FOC, I am allowed to do that. This is our train. You can see how long it is. There comes a 377, and here should be an exit signal on this platform, and there is an exit signal, but you can't see it. The thing is, when you're coming from London going to Brighton, and you might get an AWS alarm here, and you wonder, where is the corresponding moped board, or where is the corresponding speed reduction or the signal or whatever, here is the signal. You can see the plate that indicates that it is an automatic signal, and or at least part of the plate, and it is sitting in this brick wall here for whatever reason. It has been like this since day one. The thing is, this wall does not have collision, so if I move through the wall, you can see the signal alright, and it is showing a double yellow aspect at the moment. It has a number. You can even call the signaler here. It tells me proceed as indicated. I will do, no problem. So it is a working signal, but you can't see it because it is clipped in the wall. No, I don't want to give up control. I will return to my cab immediately. There was a post in Japanese on the forums the other day asking for this to be fixed, and I can just second this. Please move this signal out here. Here there is enough room for the signal. It is just an odd situation with this signal here clipping into the brick wall. Now it is red and you can't even see it when you're coming that direction. Just wonder, oh, why did I get an AWS alarm? There is not even a signal. Okay, let's go back to our train and drive it home. Yeah, the plates, by the way, that we talked about, you can see the tare weight of the wagon, and you can see the maximum load of the wagon and the type JNA. Just like we talked about it. And it is really amazing how much AI traffic there is on this route. So, again, follow the exit and egress procedures that are laid out in the operating manual so that we don't lose our fingers. Signaler, may I start from Thornton Heath? Yes, you may proceed according to signals. Alright. Yeah. We have to wait a bit until the brakes release. You can see there is a lot of traffic going on in the brake pipe still. Now it is dropping to 0. When we are below the 2, we can start releasing our direct brake and greet it with some throttle. Now you can see the boards with the differential permissive speed. The 40 is for us, the 60 for the passenger trains. So now we have to keep to a speed limit of 40. Leave the sander on. And still no snow. The first time I'm not getting any snow on such a long service. No, I did not even like notch 7. But we are at the 40 anyway. Even have to make sure that we don't go beyond the 40. Well, did you count how many AI trains we encountered since we stopped at Thornton Heath? They are just everywhere. Now the horn didn't work as intended. So this timetable here is really a masterpiece. You cannot stress this enough. And you cannot praise Joe the Fish enough for that. And on the Class 66 you can really enjoy it because you see so much of it. I hope I have not been speeding on the end of the service now. I haven't. This is Streatham Common, if I'm not mistaken. We have to apply some throttle to get out of here, otherwise we will get slowed down heavily. Because there is a little ascent coming out of Streatham Common. When we stopped at the red signal, you might have noticed that there is no DRA, no driver's reminder appliance on the Class 66. That is prototypical. It does not have an installation of that kind. So we're closing in on Belham, I think, while another Class 377 from the opposite direction. Good thing is that we're always seeing them from up front. We don't see the bug with the rear door that for some reason is now always open since the last patch. Next one coming on the fast line. Here's an intermodal train from the other direction with the Class 66. You could see the Schenker livery. At least you could see a flicker of it. That's Belham. Second but last station that we have to pass. It's a Wandsworth, Common, and then Clapham Junction. And from Belham it is a quite steep descent, so we will have to use our brakes a bit. Here's already Wandsworth Common with another 377 waiting. And those yellows might probably be already for our final stop. But anyway, let's take them seriously and not assume that we can run to the last position, because there are actually still two signals between us, but this one is double yellow as well. So we might actually be allowed to enter Clapham Junction. Platform 16, I guess it will be, because those are the tracks that pass below the line that is going to London Victoria and make its way to Acton. And to the Acton TC, what is given here in the description, Acton TC is Acton Terminal Complex, where is obviously some yard where we are supposed to go to with our train. I'm virtually crawling into Clapham Junction now with the yellows. But the yards are already ticking downwards. And there will be a 20 restriction before we get into the station. And now we got a single yellow and the direction indicator telling us that we're going to the right. And the red signal that follows on this yellow will be the exit signal, and we will have to stop there. We will have to drive quite close to the signal what has been reason for or cause for some criticism on the forums, because it's always a kind of a spat risk. But given the situation that you have to stop at the exit signal. I think it is quite usual that you have to drive up to the signal quite close. I think we do not have an AWS magnet for this signal here. At least I can't remember that I ever got one. Now see, there is another 377 coming from Acton. So the game is getting to the border of performance with the 3 trains next to us and me sneaking up to this, or crawling up to this red signal. See where the stop marker is, it is really close. But still in a way that we can see the signal. Okay. That was the service. It was a long service, given the fact that we were driving with 45 all the time, even though the speed limit showed like 90 or almost. But it is a super relaxing service to drive, in my opinion, as are most of the newly added freight services on the Brighton Main Line. Sometimes the limits that you get are a bit confusing. Some of the services run on passenger limits. Some of the services have very weird freight limits that are most of the time not signaled in on the boards, so you don't have differential permissible speeds on the boards, and nevertheless it shows those speeds on the speed diagram, and they are rather low. But nevertheless, it is a lot of fun driving those services on the Class 66, and I'm really happy that they added them. For cooling down and ending the stream after 2 hours 30, I wanted to just have the train go on, because the AI will take over and take this train sometime out of the map as soon as the dispatcher allows it. And you can see that there is actually a lot of track that works, that the AI trains can use until they kicked me out of the second man seat. Okay, it is an ATO train, obviously, because we did not get a driver. Maybe I should release the brakes. Can I do that? Because they are screeching badly. No, I can't. We will have to live with the screeching. What we can see is how this train is taken out of the map. And this is obviously a part of the track that you cannot use as a player train, but the AI can use it. And the player trains are coming from London Victoria. This is the line that we are passing by going through this little tunnel. Oh. Let's turn off the safety systems, otherwise we will have this alarm all the time. And the AI does not really care about the yellows. So again, this whole part of London is part of the DLC, but it is not part of the playable area. It is represented, but there are no playable trains going there. But you can ride nevertheless on the AI train and let it take you to the very edge of the world. And with that, I thank you for watching. I thank you for staying with me. It was a long stream. It is a lot of theory that we talked about today when we were trying to figure out how fast a freight train can actually go in the United Kingdom. Next time we will resume with ETCS in Luzern-Sursee. Thank you CD Radar for staying with me, and now we are going into the woods and are out of our train. Thank you very much. Take care. Have a good time. See you next time.